Jazu sir, we can start.
Hanji. Good evening, JCF. A very warm welcome to you all. After successfully completing our JCF series, Hum Tum 1 to 8, on variety of topics with world's renowned most successful personalities and known faces like Prasoon Pandey, Dr. Sunil Shroff, Mr. Amish Tripathi, Mr. Raghavendra Rathore, Mr. Anand Sharma, Mrs. Hema Malini and Aisha Deol, Mr. Govinda and Tina. Now today we are here with our JCF series Hum Tum 9. I introduce you to our today's panelist, Mr. Rajiv Arora. He is known all over Rajasthan as Sadbhavna Ke Sipahi, is founder of only Indian international jewelry brand Amrapali. Started his social political career in 1972 when he became General Secretary of College Union. He was founder member of NSUI. Since then, he has served his party and government in different capacities, including chairman of Rajasthan Tourism Development Corporation. Closely associated and friends with our popular Chief Minister, Shri Ashok Gehlot, since 1974. He is working with Dr. Tharoor in All India Professional Congress and interacts with him regularly. So who can be better to talk to him than Mr. Rajiv Arora, who is our JCF chairman also. Now I would like to formally introduce Mr. Shashi Tharoor. He is a renowned Indian politician, writer, and is currently serving as Member of Parliament, Lok Sabha, from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala since 2009. He was formerly Under Secretary General of the United Nations. He is an acclaimed writer, having authored 19 best-selling works of fiction and non-fiction since 1981, which are centered on India and its history, culture, film, politics, society, foreign policy, and more related themes. He is also the author of hundreds of columns and articles and publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time, Newsweek, and the Times of India. He was a contributing editor of Newsweek. In 2019, he received the Sahitya Academy Award for his book, An Era of Darkness, in a non-fiction category in English language. He is one of the most favorite and liked orator in the world. Also for me, he is my most favorite orator. So I, J.K. Jaju, convener programs, JCF, along with all the trustees and complete JCF family, welcome in JCF series Hum Tum 9, our most loved and liked Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Over to Rajiv ji. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jaju sir, and welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor and all the participants. After this COVID-19, we thought that we should start something which can be very interesting to start this series of webinar. And it has been a great success. Last 2 months, we met, we saw, and I was hearing Dr. Tharoor other day. He said this webinar, we can name it Doordarshan. So, because Dur se Darshan, so webinar is Doordarshan in Dr. Tharoor's what he has said. So it is, for me, it's a great privilege and pride to be in conversation with Dr. Tharoor, because with whom I am also working very closely in Professional Congress. Dr. Tharoor, we would like to ask you questions on different aspects because people really want to know each chapter of book Shashi Tharoor. So, so the first question is, we would like to know about your early life and memories of school and college days, and tips to our members how to improve the language, because everybody, they know that you are the best.
Well, that one is easy to answer. Just read indiscriminately. You asked about my early life. I actually was in London. My parents happened to be there, but we moved back to India when I was a little over 2 years old, two and a half. And I grew up mainly in Bombay, as it was then called, Mumbai. high school in Calcutta when my father got transferred there, college in Delhi at St. Stephen's, and then I went off with a scholarship to do graduate studies in the States. So my young years and my youth and adolescence were spent on the move, as it were. As far as the sort of defining element of my childhood is concerned, it probably was my asthma. I was a terrible sufferer from bad bronchial asthma, during which, unfortunately, I spent a lot of time confined to bed. And this is where I discovered books, because every person of my age who wasn't able to go out and play with friends, what other options were there? There was no television in India in those days. There certainly was no Nintendo or PlayStation or handheld mobile or games or computers. So these were not even gleams in inventors' eyes. All one had was books, and books became my escape, books became my entertainment, books became my education. And so from a very young age, often sitting up in bed, unable to breathe, unable to sleep, all I had were books. My eyes grew wide with just reading. And so for whatever you people want to ask about vocabulary or whatever, it only comes not from mugging up the dictionary, but from reading widely, indiscriminately, because I really had no other choice. There was no other activity possible for me. And the result in many ways is that it helped shape a lot of things. It was fairly character shaping, because when you have to go and take examinations while struggling to do something as basic as breathe, you develop a certain tough willpower, a certain habits of work and self-discipline, which were very useful. And I also, when I was not wheezing and asthmatic, and I was functioning, I instinctively made much more of it than perhaps most people, because I didn't take for granted what it meant to be alive and well and breathing and moving and functioning. And so I tried to get something worth out of every minute that I was well enough to enjoy. And the result has been a lifelong habit of hard work, of trying to squeeze more than 60 seconds worth out of every minute. And at the same time, very wide intellectual interests. I was, of course, a cricket nut like many Indian kids that age at that time, but I stayed involved, and that remains my extracurricular passion. I did get into school debating and then college debating, as well as acting. Did a lot of theatre in school and college. Extracurricular activities were my other means of self-expression. And of course, because of my immersion in books, I began writing from a very young age. In fact, it's when I ran out of books that I had no choice, because there was nothing left to do. There were no books I could read. I didn't have any elder brothers or sisters to borrow books from. And if my parents took me to a library, I would finish the book in the Bombay traffic on the way home. So it was not as if I had a whole lot of options. So I started writing stories very much like stories I was reading. And my first story published at the age of 10 kind of convinced me that I should be a writer as well. And so all of these things, I suppose, would be the themes that I would pick up for you, Rajiv, from my early days in answer to your question.
So, Dr. Tharoor, you had an illustrious career as diplomat in UN. Anything you would like to share with us regarding working and experience in that prestigious assignment in UN?
The UN is a very interesting place. It's also a very mixed bag. I worked initially, I began my UN career with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And that, of course, was an incredibly both exciting and moving responsibility, because you were actually working for people who had lost everything. The refugees had given up their homes, their lives, their countries, their friendships, their cherished assumptions of their daily existence were gone. And they'd come to another country, they needed protection, they needed assistance, and in some cases they needed to be resettled in third countries. And so working for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees was not the same as, say, pushing files in the Treasury Department or writing papers on development studies or whatever. This was an action-oriented assignment, my first 11 years of my UN career. And I can tell you so many stories from that. We don't have the time. One anecdote I still remember from my days heading the UN office in Singapore during the boat people crisis, when the Vietnamese people fleeing communism got onto little boats and went out into the South China Sea, and they got rescued by merchant vessels and other big ships coming into the port of Singapore. My office was there to arrange their disembarkation, look after them in a refugee camp we ran, negotiate the resettlement elsewhere, negotiate with the Singapore authorities the various issues and legal permissions required. It was quite an exciting and interesting and challenging time, because the crisis was at its peak during the time that I was there. It was part of my job to bring down the numbers and get people moving. And I remember one particular incident of a young couple that left Vietnam in a tiny boat with a sort of cannibalized tractor engine, which conked out inevitably. And when it conked out, the boat started drifting on the South China Seas. They ran out of food, they ran out of water. They were subsisting essentially on rainwater and hope that they would be rescued. But they had two small infants with them, a child about 1.5 years old and a tiny baby. And how would they survive on rainwater? So what did the parents do? They slit their fingers with a penknife and let the baby suck their own blood in order to get some nourishment in order to survive. It was an incredible story. When they were rescued, as it happens by an American ship, they were too weak to even sit up in the boat. They had to be bodily lifted and taken into this gigantic vessel. They were brought into the port. My staff and I broke every rule in the book to rush them to intensive care in the general hospital so they could survive. And then to see the same family a few months later, healthy, well-fed, well-dressed, and setting off for new lives in the US, the country that had saved them, that represented the kind of satisfaction that very few jobs can afford. And I've seen refugees from Somalia, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, Vietnam, Cambodia, people from around the world, Poland, the Achinese from Sumatra, all sorts of cases. And you know that when you can do something, when you can put your head to the pillow at night, knowing that things you've done during the day have made a real difference to human beings' lives, and the lives of people you actually can see before you, that offers an extraordinary satisfaction. Thereafter, I spent quite a few years in the UN peacekeeping area. I was in charge of operations during the civil war in Yugoslavia, which was a former Yugoslavia, we should now say. A terrible time as well. Unlike the refugee work, where you had a greater success in solving problems, you knew that yesterday's refugees were no longer going to be refugees today. With this war, you knew that the 18-hour days you were putting in would not necessarily stop the bloodshed tomorrow. But during the 5-6 years of very intense work on that, I saw an enormous amount of human suffering, danger. I saw some of the passions that can be ignited by nationalist frenzy. And that's something that has stayed with me in my mind when a multi-ethnic country broke up because of ethnic nationalist passions. That was the second big experience. Then I worked with Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN, as not his right hand, I would say one of his right fingers, in his own office. Traveled half the world with him. Had the great privilege of rubbing shoulders with some of the famous leaders we only see on television normally or read in the newspapers. Had tea with Tony Blair in Downing Street, and had vodka with Yeltsin in the Kremlin, and President Jiang Zemin in China. The whole experience of seeing the world, as it were, from the top was also a very, very interesting experience. Having worked for refugees and in peacekeeping, to be in the Secretary General's immediate team was a very different sort of experience. That too occupied me for 4 or 5 years, and then I was elevated to be Under Secretary General of the UN, heading the Department of Public Information, which was the largest department in the entire organization. We had over 880 staff in 77 countries, and I was asked to take over at a time when we needed to trim the budget, trim the staff members, consolidate and rationalize offices, conduct the kind of administrative reform that we were under pressure from governments to do. So I learned a bit about management and budget as well at that stage of my career. So at the end of it all, 29-year career, and the last year I was India's nominee to contest for Secretary General of the UN to succeed Kofi Annan. It was a good race. I got a decent number of votes, came second out of 7 illustrious contenders. But second is still not good enough. So I came back at the end of that experience. No regrets. It was a wonderfully interesting career, but the Gita teaches us that you do the right thing irrespective of the outcome or the reward. I didn't get the reward. The outcome was not what I'd hoped for, but I can still look back on 29 years well spent and very constructively and usefully engaged in meaningful work. And at the end of all of that, as you know, Rajiv, I came into Indian politics.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you, but I think no one has so much experience than you with for the global matters, because you have worked with so many positions. And that's why I think in Davos in 1998, the Economic Forum nominated you as the global leader for future, for tomorrow. So I think it was a great honor, Dr. Tharoor. So why and how, this question has two aspects. Why and how you decided to come in politics. You contested your first election in March 2009, and you were Minister for Foreign Affairs and afterwards for HRD. And the second question is, what difference you see in UPA government and the present government?
Ooh, there's a lot to answer there. I mean, essentially, the entire orientation of the two governments, I think, is very different. UPA came in with very much a vision of trying to expand the rights of the people. They spent their time creating a rights-based framework for Indian democracy. We've seen it, for example, in the creation of the Right to Information Act, which has enhanced accountability and transparency, in the right to education, which made the onus on the government if a child was out of school, in the right to food security, in even the right to fair compensation for land. So a number of rights were established. And I would even talk about the right to work, because the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme said that if you are living below the poverty line in rural India, you have a right to work and to be paid for work. And the government has an obligation to give you that work. So all of that, I think, is extremely important for us to understand and appreciate. And in many ways, what was good about all of this was that we gave our democracy a greater content, greater depth, greater meaning, and greater fulfillment. And I must say that UPA's defining legacy, if you look back on the 10 years, would be those things: the creation of a rights-based framework, employment for the poor and increasing their purchasing power. You certainly had, of course, some other achievements. We pulled over 10 million people out of below the poverty line into above the poverty line every year during those 10 years. That was an extraordinary success. We presided over a significant amount of economic growth, as well as just GDP growth. The per capita level also grew up. And I must say that in the foreign policy arena, the Indo-US nuclear deal was a significant breakthrough, which no one could have expected. So all of these things give you a considerable legacy. I have to say that when you look objectively at the NDA government or BJP government in the last 6 years, you cannot point to any achievement. I mean, it's quite astonishing. I don't know whether in India's political history in 70 odd years that we have had 6 years that are so completely devoid of any tangible achievement whatsoever. Instead, what we have is a lot of rhetoric and, surprisingly enough, some really some actions and decisions that have hurt the public. The demonetization, for example, which actually cost a number of lives of people, destroyed the economy to 2% of our GDP growth, from which we had not even properly recovered when COVID hit. The indifference and inattention shown to the migrant workers today, the hasty and botched implementation of GST, which had so many problems created for ordinary small businesses in particular, the extraordinary failure in employment generation. We already had, before COVID, the worst unemployment figures in the last 45 years. Now we have the worst unemployment figures ever recorded because of COVID as well. But the fact is the groundwork had been laid by the BJP's failures before that. So when you look back on this, I must say I find it terribly disappointing. We have a very, very fine orator as our Prime Minister, a great rhetorician. But speaking is one thing, delivering is another. And I'm sorry to say we have not seen any delivery on the ground. He has toilets to point to, but many of those toilets don't have running water. I've spoken to people from villages in UP who tell me many of the toilets that have been built in their village are being used as godowns to store sacks of rice and other provisions because there is no water, no one can use them as a toilet, and people still go to the fields. There is talk of free gas cylinders for women, but in very many cases, the women have not been able to afford the refills, or they use the gas cylinders for special occasions and continue cooking in their airless kitchens because of that unaffordability of the replacement cylinder. So some of these kinds of stories make you wonder about ourselves as a nation, that we have tried to deepen our democracy so that people vote not for identity issues, but for performance issues.
Yes.
Sadly, the BJP has managed successfully to project identity politics ahead of performance politics.
But it was a good decision for Indians that you decided to come back to India and come in politics. Otherwise, वो भी दूरदर्शन रहता कि आप तो बाहर ही बैठे रहते और like when I was young, I used to read about you, about your articles in different magazines, and we used to think that why, it's a kind of a brain drain from India, everyone who is intelligent, smart, forward-looking, sitting outside India, So welcome back to India, and what you are giving, the leadership, kind of leadership you always see is great. I would like to ask you about your very, very famous speech about British colonialism, which millions of views on YouTube and social media. Can we know the gist in next 10-15 minutes about the British colonialism which you spoke?
Well, I'm not sure that I should go through the whole speech again. Anyone can watch it on YouTube.
No, but yeah.
But the key point, Rajiv, is that this was being written at a time when, for the preceding 15, 20 years, a lot of British writers had been acting and writing and succeeding with their writing as if the British colonial legacy was a great act of generosity on their part towards India. They were really claiming that colonialism had helped unite India, had created the institutions of democracy in India, had given us the capability to take advantage of globalization, all of the stuff which frankly, I found deeply offensive, that, they had looted, exploited, and oppressed a country for 200 years. And then they are going around trying to take credit for having acted out of generosity, which was far from the reality. And so I thought it was necessary to set the record straight. I did so in a debate at Oxford University, where I pointed out that they took the Hindi word loot from into their habits as well as their dictionaries. But the fact is that these people, I thought, needed some facts and figures. So when the speech went viral and people were very interested in what I had to say, my publisher suggested that I put it into a book. And of course, that required a little more research, substantiation, footnoting, and so on. It's called An Era of Darkness in India, and it's called Inglorious Empire Abroad. It's the same book, except in India we have lakhs and crores, and in the foreign edition.
Yeah, you got Sahitya Akademi Award also for this book.
Yes, this is the same book on the same issue.
Yeah.
So my thesis is very simple. It is that the British systematically looted and exploited India throughout their time, that they had no commitment to India, but rather only to what they could get out of it, that every one of the institutions that they now claim credit for were actually only brought in to enhance British rule, to entrench British power, to enhance British interests, and to increase British profits. It was not about anything to benefit India. Even you take the railways, for example, which is a favorite example. Oh, the British gave us the railways. They didn't give us the railways. We paid every penny for the construction of the railways in India from Indian taxes. Not one penny, actually, because the British had to advance the capital, but they were repaid handsomely at the highest rates of interest, double the rates of interest that British Treasury securities were giving.
Yes.
And each mile of railway built in India cost 9 times more than the same mile at the equivalent time in the US or Canada, because of the sheer profit making that was going on. They ran the railways only in order to extract minerals from the interior of the country, take them to the ports, and ship these minerals, resources, goods to England. And on top of that, they were able to use the trains to send troops into the interior to quell any disturbance. For example, the claim that they were able to avoid famines through railway lines is false. There is research showing that famines continued and persisted, in some cases were worse in areas served by the trains. So the trains were not to serve Indians at all. And even when Indians finally were able to travel as passengers on these trains, and these third-class compartments were added with benches, wooden slats as benches for people to sit on, the Indian passenger was paying the highest passenger fares in the world, while British cargo was paying the lowest freight rates in the world. So it's only after 1947 and independence that we took the same railways. Of course, we added to them with more lines and more trains, but we transformed the ethos of the railways into something that truly knit the nation together rather than serving a foreign country's interests. So I go into very great detail on everything. The argument that Britain gave us unity is nonsense. They actually, in many ways, divided us. Partition would not have happened without the British policy of divide and rule, for example. But I feel that since you will have questions coming in from the audience, I shouldn't spend too much on an issue which I've written about so much. Broadly speaking, I end up saying there are only 3 things that truly we can thank the British for: cricket, tea, and the English language. And even those were not given to us on purpose. Cricket, the British played for their own pleasure. And they needed to train some Indians in order to give them, have enough people to play and give them practice ball to them, field for them, and so on. And then we acquired the skills to go with it and became much better than them at the game in recent years. Similarly, tea, they grew tea in India. They brought the bushes from China, tried to grow them here, and failed. Then they actually found tea in Assam. They grew it. It was a big hit. But they didn't grow it for us. They grew it to export to England.
Yes, yes.
And only a tiny portion of the Indian tea harvest was kept in India, not for Indians, but for the Englishmen living in India. It was only during the Great Depression, when the bottom fell out of the world market and the British housewife could no longer afford imported Indian tea, that the British, sitting with lots of unsold stocks of tea, were forced to sell it in India and develop an Indian market. So again, it was not intended for us. Now, of course, we drink tea all the time, but that's how it started. And thirdly, of course, as far as the English language is concerned, the language in which I can address you today, I must say that the English only wanted to teach a very small class to be a sort of buffer between the governors and the governed, rulers and the ruled. And they were meant to do clerical type jobs. They were never intended to acquire English to a level that they could either aspire for jobs the British were doing or challenge the British. But Indians being Indians, we learned for ourselves. We took it on. And apart from the sort of Babu English of the clerical classes, you had people from India mastering English and acing even the ICS examinations and putting the English in their place. And you had people like Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose and others whose English was as good as any Englishman's, but who used the language, Banerjee, people who used the language to articulate Indian nationalism and attack the British. So even that, one can say that the great English language was developed and used as a language and a vehicle of Indian nationalism by Indians. So that's broadly the thesis. The book is much more in it than I can summarize in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I could tell you the whole story in 5 minutes. No one would need to read the book, but you do need to read the book, An Era of Darkness.
No. But, and we are so lucky that you are with us and you're one of the most accomplished writers of our time. You are in so much in news about your famous writing, The Hindu Way. And a little bit about The Hindu Way. So people will read the book definitely. Many must have read also. But what do you think? Because I heard that you are also writing a new book on nationalism.
Right. Well, the book's on Hinduism. There's Why I'm a Hindu, which is a little more political, and the Hindu way, which is completely non-political, almost completely non-political. I would say that if you were to look objectively at these two things, as far as the two books are concerned, I felt that it was important for me as an individual to articulate my own Hinduism, my own faith, which I believed in many ways was the faith of a large number of Hindus whose voices were drowned out by the aggressive Hinduism of the Hindutva brigade. And I wanted to explain the Hinduism with which I grew up, the Hinduism I read and studied and understood, the Hinduism that I felt the vast silent majority of Hindus believes in. And that was why I wrote first Why I'm a Hindu, because I explicitly contrasted it with the Hindutva ideology and made a case for taking Hinduism back from that. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but then just to explain the difference between that and the Hindu way. The Hindu way was just a non-political version. We took out the Hindutva, we took out the politics, because some people who were not interested in politics but were interested in reading my views were keen on having a non-political version of the book, and that's really what the Hindu way is. Now, what's my core argument? My core argument is that Hinduism is essentially an extraordinarily accommodative religion. I am a very passionate follower of Swami Vivekananda, who I think explained the faith the best. He did all his preaching in English, so no one can accuse me of having misunderstood what he had to say. And because of his very clear understanding of the faith, I grew up with that kind of Hinduism in my mind, which is that, it's not just tolerance, but acceptance that we have to practice. Tolerance is a virtue. We are all taught in school a tolerant king is a good king because he allows people of other beliefs and other faiths to live. But essentially, if you think about it, tolerance is a patronizing idea, because the tolerant person says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will indulge you in your right to be wrong. Whereas what Vivekananda teaches us is that tolerance is not enough. You need acceptance. And the accepting person says, I believe I have the truth. You believe you have the truth. I will respect your truth. Please respect my truth. And to my mind, this message is so fundamental to Hinduism, and it is completely overlooked by the Hindutva brigade, which speaks of Hinduism the way the British football hooligan talks about his team. If you don't support my team, I hit you on the head. That is not Hinduism. Hinduism says, Swami Vivekananda used to quote the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which says that as many rivers flow down many hills, or straight in different ways and end up in the same sea, so all ways of worship end up in the same Brahman, the same divine, the same God. And that idea is the Hindu idea. Not every other religion shares this idea, but there is the Hindu belief. So if you want to be a good Hindu, you have to accept somebody else's right to be a good Muslim, a good Christian, whatever they want, and respect them for it. That is the Hindu way, but that is not the way of some of the people who claim to be defenders of Hinduism in a very negative spirit. That's essentially my message from that book.
So we are now facing a worst crisis of our lives, Corona, COVID-19. And who else can be better than you to tell us about the post-COVID world, geopolitical implications of coronavirus? Because you know how the world is going to change, how the politics is going to change, the effect we can see, and what's happening in the US, that's also very concerning now. Also, the people are against China, economic and emotional backlash against China. So what would be the geopolitical implication of coronavirus, Dr. Tharoor?
Right. Well, look, as far as the coronavirus is concerned, it has created a number of complications for the world order, as well as, of course, for individual countries within these countries. In our own country, we've seen clearly that our government sadly has failed to deal with the key issues. I think they were right to declare a lockdown in some ways, as our party demanded they do it sooner, but they didn't want to declare it earlier. They wanted to keep everything functioning until they could bring down the Madhya Pradesh government. Only then were they prepared to declare a lockdown. But having done that, we supported them on that. but the lockdown was implemented very badly. And the main reason for that was the lack of planning in the Prime Minister's approach, exactly as with demonetization. He said, at 3 hours notice, we're shutting everything down. Now, that is the kind of inhumane behavior we already saw on demonetization. And that's why Rahul Gandhi has called it demonetization 2.0. It's the same kind of approach. Now, what happened with that approach? There was no time for people to make any plans. If you're a factory owner and your workers sleep on the factory floor, you couldn't even make arrangements for them to sleep there or somewhere else. Suddenly, in 3 hours notice, you had to shut down your factory. If you were a migrant worker and you wanted to go back to your village, you couldn't go because all the trains and planes and buses and highways were all shut down. So at the end of the day, 3 hours notice is inhumane, it's cruel, and also it prevents effective planning and implementation. And the result of that, unfortunately, we've seen the human tragedies of over 220 people, migrant workers, who have died on the way, either being run over by trucks or cargo trains, or by simply perishing out of hunger and exhaustion, falling down exhausted, unable to get to their homes. It's been a great human tragedy, a monumental tragedy that the government unfortunately has to carry the blame for, and still the virus has shot up. We are now over 2 lakh cases in India, whereas when the lockdown was first declared, we barely had 500 cases. So we are now looking at a situation that is much more serious, and that's very worrying. I would say that we are going to have to, as the Prime Minister himself now admits, having said that the Mahabharat war was won in 18 days, we'll win the Corona war in 21 days. 75 days later, he is not saying that anymore. He's saying we have to live with the virus. We will live with it, but no thanks, unfortunately, to Mr. Modi and his government. Now, coming back to the larger question of world affairs, China and so on, there's a lot of hostility to China because the virus originated from there, and many people, many countries feel that China concealed their information, which is why President Trump, for example, has taken the view that he'll leave the WHO for shielding China, that he will condemn China in every world forum, all of that. And indeed, we've seen many of us on WhatsApp have received forwards of people looking Chinese or of Chinese descent being abused or thrown out of supermarkets in Western countries. Very sad story. This is wrong. Human beings should not judge people because of their nationality or their race. But that's happened even in our country, where many of our northeastern citizens who are seen as looking Chinese are being mistreated in some places. And of course, we've seen our Indian version of this because of the Tablighi Jamaat incident. Large numbers of Muslims were demonized as well in this country a few weeks ago in really, really bad ways. And no community, no race, no nationality has a monopoly on the virus, and we should never have allowed anyone to behave that way. But all of that has happened. Globally, multilateralism is under threat. If the US pulls out of WHO, now Brazil is threatening to pull out of WHO, their entire edifice of international cooperation, which I served for 29 years, is looking very, very much in danger. And I worry about that because this is a time when countries should be coming together, not going apart. We should be doing much more together as the world requires us to. And then the other thing is that I think there'll be major changes in world economics because the talk of nationalism, protectionism is increasing. Countries have suddenly discovered their dependence on global supply chains hurt them when this virus hit, because suddenly if you're manufacturing something but a crucial part comes from somewhere else and that country is locked down, then your own manufacturing suffers. Countries don't like that. Many countries discovered even pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical ingredients are made in China. And of course, China and India. They feel that their dependence on China is something they want to reduce. So many countries are saying, let us move production back to our countries. Our Prime Minister speaks of Atmanirbharta. And we're looking at a situation in which there is open talk, unfortunately, about things like decoupling from China, isolating China. Japan has reserved $2.25 billion for Japanese companies who will be willing to pull out of China. So all of these things are happening.
Can we make this challenge an opportunity for India?
We could, but we have not so far been able to. The estimate is about 1,000 companies may come out of China. Of those, there is a maximum of 300 who might be to India. They're discovering that despite the Prime Minister's talk of ease of doing business, that it is not that easy to do business in India. And there are three main factors. One is, of course, the input costs. Land, labor, and so on are difficult in our country. Land, labor, infrastructure. Unfortunately, places like Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam have better facilities to offer in that area. But the second thing we have is this terrible regulatory environment, where the number of bureaucratic requirements and regulatory compliance are the worst in the world, according to many business people. That has really, really intimidated many. And then the third thing we've got is tax terrorism, which is really a BJP invention, because this government has started a fashion. I've learned this from IRS officers myself. They give them targets every month and say, you have to make this kind of money. So the revenue intelligence people in all these areas, they say, what choice do we have? We have to go and raid business people if they're not doing anything very bad, because we have these targets to meet. If the government didn't impose these targets on us, we would not be conducting tax terrorism. So there is that reputation also India has. So all of these things together, I'm sorry to say, will not be an encouraging thing. Already there is a study by Nikkei about 2019, where 58 companies left China, and I think only 3 are in talks with India. All the others went to Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. So leaving China will not translate into an opportunity unless we drastically reform our system and convince the world we have done so. I would scrap the entire collection of business regulations we have and instead ask the Singaporeans if we can borrow theirs. Have something simple, straightforward that has been proven to work, and then try and implement that. Because right now, our bureaucracy is running rampant over business, and that's something that is not doing the country any good.
Dr. Tharoor, you know that our organizations, Jaipur Cultural Forum and Mohan Foundation, work for caregiver organ transplant. And millions of people need organs. Can we in professional congress make it an important objective, a mission to create awareness about organ donation and caregiver organ transplant? And who else, you know, if you send a message every month on social media supporting this, there will be a change in the scene of healthcare in India. We would like to know your views and messages for our team on organ donation.
Right. Well, I mean, the truth is that I myself am an organ donor. It's a very important cause. I have raised it in Parliament during the previous term of the BJP government. I asked them a question about this. I'm not happy with the government's approach. It should be doing much more to encourage and promote organ donation. So, Rajiv, why don't you take it on as a challenge of the All India Professionals Congress in your zone to begin with, get the message out. It's a very important thing, because the fact is that we have a terrible shortage, and it's sad because people can make such a difference to other human beings. Every time there is a tragedy, a car accident where somebody dies, but most of his or her organs are preserved, they can actually literally benefit 6, 7 beneficiaries. Eyes to one person, you know, liver, heart, so many different parts of the body can be given to different people. And the truth is that very, very few Indians have thought of doing this. If it's publicly known that you're an organ donor, then only what people do, but you may not have any evidence on your person that you are. Your family members feel, oh my God, they're going to cut up our father or our beloved one. They don't like that. But if you think about the fact that a part of you will live on another human being, you're actually prolonging life even amid death. It's a very, very worthwhile thing to do.
Yeah, Dr. Tharoor, we have given the name to this, the work we are doing to organ recipient, and our slogan, which we gave, एक खामोशी अनेक मुस्कान आओ करें अंगदान. एक व्यक्ति की तो खामोशी होती है, लेकिन कितने लोगों के जीवन के अंदर खुशी आ जाती है. तो ये हम लोग इसलिए काम कर रहे हैं. हम चाहेंगे कि समय समय पे आप भी कभी सोशल मीडिया पे ऑर्गन डोनेशन को सपोर्ट करें, तो उससे हमारे मूवमेंट को बहुत ताकत मिलेगी. तो आप हिंदी में थोड़ा बात जी.
नहीं, मैं कहने वाला था कि हम तो राजनीति में जानते हैं कि कुछ लोगों की खामोशी बहुत बहुत लाखों लोगों को खुश देगी, लेकिन ये तो दूसरी बात है. नवजीवन का बिल्कुल ये स्लोगन बहुत अच्छा लगा. आप इसको जरूर प्रमोट कीजिए.
ठीक है, आपका जरूर सपोर्ट लेंगे, आपको ब्रांड एम्बेसडर बनाएंगे हमारा, और आपके फोटो को आगे लगा के लोगों से अपील करेंगे, क्योंकि जिससे भी आप मिलते हैं उसका आप अपना बना लेते हैं. तो इतनी गर्मजोशी से मिलने वाला मैंने कोई पब्लिकर देखा नहीं। कि जब से मेरी आपसे मुलाकात हुई है, मैं तो आपका फैन हूँ, आप मालूम है, आपके संग काम करता हूँ, और आप भी ऐसा करते हैं, जो आप बोलते हैं, जो कहते हैं वो करते हैं। सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट बात ये है, मुझे मुझे याद है कि आपने मुझसे कुछ प्रॉमिस करा था, जब टाइम मिला आपने वो वैसे वैसे आप करते रहे हमेशा से। तो इतनी अच्छी हिंदी बोलते हैं, और जयपुर तो आपकी बहुत पसंदीदा जगह है। एवरी ईयर यू कम, वैसे भी आप टाइम टू टाइम आते हैं, फेस्टिवल में आते हैं, और बाई चांस 26 जनवरी तो कई सालों से आप जयपुर में मना रहे हैं, क्योंकि लिप फेस्टिवल यहाँ पे होता है, और आपको कभी हमारे संग खाने का भी मौका मिल जाता है। तो मैंने देखा है कि आपकी खासियत क्या है कि आप अलग अलग जहाँ जाते हैं उस प्रदेश का खाना खाना पसंद करते हैं। मुझे याद है कि एक बार मेरे आपने दाल बाटी चूरमा खाया और इतना पसंद आया, मेरी वाइफ कह रही थी आप डॉक्टर थरूर के लिए दाल बाटी चूरमा बना रहे हो, पता नहीं वो खाएंगे कि नहीं खाएंगे। लेकिन वी आर ऑल सरप्राइज कि आप इतने चाव से रेलिश करते हैं जहाँ भी जगह जाते हैं। तो कुछ जयपुर के बारे में, राजस्थान के बारे में आपकी आप कुछ सोचते हो, कुछ बताते हो, कि उसके बाद मैं फिर तरंग को दूंगा। उसके बाद बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस आ रहे हैं, वो आपसे क्वेश्चन पूछेगा। तो कुछ जयपुर के बारे में, राजस्थान के बारे में कुछ
देखिए,
बताइए।
जयपुर कौन नहीं पसंद करता। मुझे लग रहा है कि भारत के हर कोने से कोई भी जो जयपुर आए हैं वो सोचते हैं कि इतना सुंदर शहर और इतने अच्छे लोग देखना और मिलना आसान बात नहीं है कहीं और। आप सही कहा कि मैं आपका राजस्थानी का खाना मुझे बहुत पसंद है, दाल बाटी, लेकिन ये भी मानना चाहिए कि मैं वेजिटेरियन हूँ, तो आपका खाना, आपका घर का खाना तो मुझे नेचुरली बहुत बहुत पसंद हुआ है, क्योंकि यही है जो जो वेजिटेरियन के सबसे पसंदीदा खाना जो राजस्थान में आप खिलाते हैं। लेकिन जयपुर में कई चीजें मुझे अच्छा लगा। पहली बात है, आप जानते हैं कि मैं हर साल आता हूँ आपके लिट फेस्ट के लिए, जो साहित्य मेला, मेरे ख्याल में दुनिया में ऐसे कुछ नहीं है जो इस सुंदर इलाके में आप साहित्य और साहित्य आइडियाज की चर्चा होने के लिए ऐसा एक जगह में ये मौका मिले, तो मैं हर साल बहुत खुशी से आता हूँ। फिर आपके जो मॉन्यूमेंट्स है, इसके बारे में तो क्या बताऊं, आपका अंबर पैलेस, आपका हवा महल, सिटी पैलेस, जंतर मंतर, सब कुछ है आपके वहाँ देखने लायक। अगर कोई भी टूरिस्ट के रूप में आए और फोटो खींचना चाहते हैं सुंदर मॉन्यूमेंट्स के सामने, जयपुरी है जगह। फिर अगर शॉपिंग करना चाहते हैं, आपके जो हैंडीक्राफ्ट्स है, ज्वेलरी, मैं अमरापली का एडवर्टाइजमेंट नहीं करूंगा, लेकिन मैं अमरापली आया हूँ और वहाँ आपके जो ये म्यूजियम भी है, ज्वेलरी का म्यूजियम, इतना अनयूजुअल, इतना अद्भुत सा म्यूजियम है, क्योंकि भारत में मैं तो पहली बार देखा कि इतने अच्छे कलेक्शन, इसमें ज्वेलरी के सारे इतिहास भी और उनके डिफरेंट स्टाइल्स, वेरिएशंस, नॉर्थ साउथ सब कुछ रख के एक अच्छा म्यूजियम बनाया है। ये भी जयपुर में मिल जाएगा। और फैब्रिक्स, कारपेट्स, पिछवाई पेंटिंग्स, मैं तो एक समय जब भी विदेश जाता था जयपुरी पिछवाई लेके जाता था गिफ्ट में, लोगों को बहुत पसंद आया। तो ये सब मैं क्या बताऊं, जयपुर के बारे में कहना काफी नहीं होगा, आप आना ही पड़ेगा। मैं भी आना चाहूंगा एक दिन इस लॉकडाउन के बाद, और आपके साथ शायद हम जाके कुछ और डिस्कवर करेंगे जो अब तक हम
डेफिनेटली नेक्स्ट टाइम आपका इंटरव्यू हिंदी में लेंगे। आप इतनी अच्छी हिंदी बोलते हैं, हमारे बहुत सारे जो श्रोता हैं, पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं, वो सरप्राइज हुए कि केरला त्रिवेंद्रम से मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट, जो कि बिल्कुल डीप साउथ में है, वो हिंदी, इंग्लिश और पता नहीं और भी कितनी लैंग्वेज आपको मालूम होंगी, और कितना कमांड है जो ये सरस्वती जो आपकी जिह्वा पे बैठी हुई है, इसका कोई मुकाबला नहीं है। पूरे देश में ऐसे नेताओं की जरूरत है जो सबको रिप्रेजेंट कर सके, सबकी भाषा को समझ सके। बहुत बड़ी बात है।
देखिए, भाषा समझना और बोलना बड़ी जरूरी है, क्योंकि मुझे पता है कि जैसे आप खाना के बारे में बोले, लोग के दिल कहीं पेट के रास्ते से हो तो मिलते हैं आपको, लेकिन जुबान से भी कांटेक्ट हो सकता है। राजस्थान में तो हम प्याज की कचौरी के बारे में नहीं बोला, गट्टी की सब्जी, आपका केर सब कुछ है। लेकिन मैं ये भी बोलूंगा कि अगर एक भाषा अच्छी तरह हम नहीं जानते तो हमको बोलने में जरा सा हेजिटेशन आ जाए। मैं हिंदी में मुझे ये लिंग का प्रश्न, क्योंकि मेरी जो सबसे अच्छे दो भाषाएं हैं मलयालम और इंग्लिश, दोनों में लिंग नहीं होते। हमारे मन में ये समझ नहीं आता है कि एक मेज क्यों पुल्लिंग हो और चारपाई क्यों स्त्रीलिंग हो वगैरह। तो इसमें तो काफी गलतियां आती है, इसलिए हमें बोलने में जरा सा शर्म आती है कि देखिए हम हिंदी बोलेंगे, लोग सोचेंगे कि कितने बेसिक गलतियां कर रहे हैं। लेकिन जो गोद से ये भाषा नहीं बोले, उनको ये लिंग समझना आसान बात नहीं है। दूसरी बात यह है, मैं फ्रेंच भाषा भी बोलता हूँ, काफी बोलता हूँ, उसमें भाषण भी दिया हूँ, इंटरव्यूज भी देता हूँ। फ्रेंच भाषा में ये लिंग के रूल्स जो है काफी आसान है, और क्योंकि बहुत शब्द सिर्फ प्रोनाउंसिएशन फर्क है, अंग्रेजी के जैसे हैं, और लिंग भी आपको पता है कि अगर एक उदाहरण ले ले तो अगर एक शब्द जैसे डिटर्मिनेशन होते हैं इंग्लिश में, डिटर्मिनेशन ATION अंत में आता है ना, फ्रेंच में भी डिटर्मिनेशन आप बोल सकते हैं, वही प्रोनाउंसिएशन अलग है, लेकिन जब भी ATION का अंत है वो तो स्त्रीलिंग है। तो आपको बात से आप जानते हैं कि ये सारे लफ्ज ऐसे स्त्रीलिंग में बोल सकते हैं। हिंदी में सिर्फ ई की मात्रा के लफ्ज आप स्त्रीलिंग में बोलते हैं, तो आपको कोई सिंपल रूल नहीं है समझने के लिए। तो एक दिन शायद राजीव आप मुझे सिखाएंगे AIPC के माध्यम से कि हिंदी में
बिल्कुल
कैसे बोलूं ठीक तरह से।
मैं आपसे ज्यादा जब भी बात करूंगा कोशिश करूंगा हिंदी में बात करूं, आपकी हिंदी इंप्रूव हो जाएगी। मैं जब
और मैं अंग्रेजी में जवाब दे दूं।
मैं डॉक्टर थरूर में पेरिस गया था जब फेस्टिवल ऑफ इंडिया चल रहा था पेरिस में, और मैं कुछ फ्रेंच क्लास पढ़ने के लिए गया, तो मुझे पहले दिन टीचर ने बोला कि आपको फ्रेंच सीखनी है तो बहस के कि किसी फ्रेंच लड़की से दोस्ती कर लो तो आपको अपना फ्रेंच सीख भी आ जाएगी। तो ये लोग कहते हैं कि आप किसी को दोस्त बनाओ अपना जो आपकी भाषा समझता हो तो बन जाता है। तो चलिए मैं आपका दोस्त बन जाऊंगा कुछ समय के लिए। So now Tarang has received many questions from young entrepreneurs. Tarang, you may now.
Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Hi, Tarang.
I have received a lot of questions on this webinar and from others as well. So I'm going to go as I've seen. I've tried to filter them. So the first one is partly mine. Why I'm adding this because someone asked regarding this as well. This is my bit, which is please explain about AIPC and its purpose as an individual organization and its purpose in the Congress Party. And then someone else called Ankit Jain has asked, what is the future of AIPC? Can we see future leaders groomed and picked from AIPC?
Well, I mean, those are good questions. AIPC was meant to give professionals a platform, tax-paying professionals who for the most part have other jobs and are therefore not interested in politics full-time, but who at the same time have an interest in political issues, have ideas to contribute. Very often the only option for them was to go home after a hard day's work and complain to each other at over a drink or at parties or at dinners about how terribly the country is being run. We said, no, you can do better than that. You can actually have your views heard by serving politicians, and you can yourself influence the political discourse. And so AIPC was set up as a kind of Rotary club within the Congress Party, where professionals would get together in local chapters and their ideas and their thoughts would be fed up the chain. We're only a couple of years old, and of course the last few months have been lost to the lockdown. We're trying to do a lot of things virtually, but I must say the concept has begun to catch on. Some people clearly were attracted by the prospect of seeing AIPC as an alternative route to political power, and that's fine. So when you say, how can you groom leaders to AIPC? Rahul Gandhi, when he set up AIPC, said very clearly at the start, if there are people of talent who are interested in more full-time involvement in politics, who are members of AIPC, let us know about them and we'll try and use them. So in fact, a couple of our members have gone on to become television spokespeople. Last couple of years, some AIPC members did try for tickets to contest in the elections. I'm sorry to say that they did not yet get the success. I mean, they were already in the AIPC when it was established. There were some Congress people who had already been in elective office and they continued contesting. For example, my South Zone coordinator, Dr. Geeta Reddy, who was a minister in Andhra Pradesh, undivided Andhra Pradesh. She was a candidate in the elections. She managed, unfortunately, to lose this time. but she did get a ticket. I, of course, contested. I was able to win. We had a couple of other cases. Milind Deora, who was my deputy, contested in Mumbai, did not succeed. So we had a few others like that. But for the most part, AIPC members, even if they didn't contest, played a very important role, particularly in formulating the manifesto, in conducting consultations and reporting up the change, so that the input that came from AIPC consultations became a very significant input into the Congress Party manifesto. Had we come to power, many of the professionals' ideas would have been implemented on everything from environment to culture and education, economic policy, employment policy, all sorts of things. We had suggestions from all of you and from other members. So that kind of thing worked. And I will say that in the future, we hope to be even more relevant as the Congress articulates a very effective, intelligent, and professionally sound response to the inadequacies of the BJP government. And we're already seeing some of this input. Rajiv mentioned at the beginning of this talk that yesterday I had a dialogue with Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw of ICON, trying to educate our membership about the virus and about the responses to the virus. That's only one kind of thing we can do. We can do a lot more. We are already tasking our members to come up with white papers on specific sectors of the economy, how to revive them. And we will offer these ideas to the Congress leadership to before the nation in due course. So there are a lot of good work happening that professionals can be involved in. I would encourage every professional who hasn't joined us to think of coming to profcongress.com and signing up. There's a one-time lifetime membership fee of 1,000 rupees. And once you've joined, you are a member for life, and you can do a lot as long as you want to work with us.
Sure. Nice. Okay, so the next one is, as one of the most proactive ministers in the UPA2, what is one or are some of the key policies you're personally proud to have worked on? This is asked by Alim.
Well, you know, AIPC didn't exist, unfortunately, during UPA2. So from that perspective at all, I had a couple of ministries in UPA2. I was Minister of State in the Foreign Affairs Ministry, during which time I was given specific responsibility for West Asia, what we call the Middle East in the media, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, the Hajj pilgrimage, and passports and visas. Yeah. And during the 1 year that I had that job, I must say I was very pleased to have made some significant reforms. Particularly the Hajj arrangements had been making a lot of people very unhappy, and I was able to streamline and simplify things in a much more equitable way and end the monopoly of a few vested interests. Also negotiated with Saudi Arabia a larger quota. Similarly, I was able in the relationship with many African countries to dramatically improve our relations. I went to countries where no Indian minister had gone before. Again, my knowledge of French turned out to be a huge asset. There were some meetings where I conducted the entire meeting in French and translated it for my own officials, which they didn't seem to mind. In fact, they seemed to enjoy it. The language, as I was explaining to your father a few minutes ago, actually is a way to people's hearts. That was also an asset. And so on. So there were a few useful things I was able to do. The second stint was in the Ministry of Human Resource Development. There was a little more challenging because unlike the first Ministry of External Affairs, I didn't have my own portfolio. Files didn't stop with me for anything. I was very much an understudy. The decisions were made at the minister's level and not the Minister of State level, which is why I made that comment, which many people have teased me about. When the BJP government was being sworn in, I said, warning the ministers of state that being a minister of state in the government of India is like standing in a cemetery. There are lots of people under you, but no one's listening. And that was very much my experience. But I think what I was able to do was to redefine the articulation of our policy in 2 or 3 important areas. There was an existing catechism about education in the HRD ministry, that it was about equity and expansion and excellence. So I said, well, equity and expansion have worked in the process. We have not always been attentive to excellence. What we need to do is add a 4th E, and that is employability. And that became one of my big themes, and therefore one of the themes of the UPA government's articulation of education policy is trying to connect employability. And I was a booster of Dr. Nanamu's famous report on the industry-academia interface to create and encourage the creation of more links between industry and academia. In America, for example, it is common for a company which, say, has an idea for a product to go to a university and say, okay, if you have doctorate students or postdoctoral students who are willing to research this and help devise, see if it works and how it might work, we can patent it together and you can get a share of the royalties if we manufacture it, that kind of thing. So there is a direct connection between an industry and the academic study or research being done in the university. In India, this is practically unknown or non-existent. That's a great pity. We should do very much more of that. I tried to encourage that at my time. And of course, in things like school education and university education, I've continued battling away for reducing the regulatory burden. I must say I didn't have long enough and I didn't have enough authority to make the full impact I would have liked to have had. But I came away with a good sense of what needs to be done. And I'm pleased to say that with the BJP government, I've been talking to the minister very frankly about some of the changes he needs to make. And I'm pleased that Shri Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank has been quite receptive in listening to some of these ideas. Let us hope that the government will come out with a more enlightened approach. I think issues like education ought to be above politics. We really ought to create an educated and skilled public. And I'm also very keen on skill development. That goes beyond the HRD ministry now. It's a separate ministry in the BJP government. At least in the old times, the responsibility was scattered, but we had a kind of coordinating authority. And I used to challenge the private sector saying, you too have a burden of skill development. Why can't every company above a certain capital level train people, give vocational training? And of course, you can hire the best students yourselves, but the rest should be given diplomas that they can take into the job market. And that will create greater employability and skill development in the country.
So this is what this is what we are struggling with today. Again, when we see migrant workers coming back or gone, that's what we also internally talk about, and me and my father has been talking about with my uncle, and we've been saying that how maybe we need to do skill development for local craftsmen, local artisans, Rajasthanis. Maybe we need to do more skill development here as well now, and we've been talking to the government here how to do such things. But as you said, that is a very important part as well, and especially in these scenarios and these conditions. You know?
Right, absolutely. No, I think we're on the same page on that, Taran.
I have next one from Mr. Atul Kapoor. He asks, in today's context, given the veto powers and the indiscriminate use, has the UN lost relevance and context? Can it be revived in some way to become more meaningful? Do you believe we have moved to Friedman's flat world?
No, we haven't. If anything, I think the virus has demonstrated, sadly, that the world is not flat. There are a lot of bumps, a lot of uneven factors, and that there have been winners and losers in globalization. And in recent years, the losers have been hitting back. For example, the working class in the Western world, who has seen, as they saw it, their jobs being shanghaied, being exported to China and elsewhere. They're the ones behind the America First or Make America Great Again, and that sort of xenophobic, isolationist, protectionist policies we're seeing coming out of many Western countries. But on the question of the relevance of the UN, I think the relevance is there, that this is a world which cries out. You know, when Kofi Annan was Secretary General of the UN, we used to talk about problems without passports. There is problems that crossed all boundaries, problems that crossed national frontiers. You can't put a fence in the sky and control your environment. You can't deal with human rights issues or refugee issues without recognizing that borders are being crossed. You can't deal with severe problems of epidemic disease without realizing that borders are no protection. Therefore, you need more international cooperation. You need if you have problems without passports, you need blueprints to solve them without borders. That, sadly, is what these people don't understand, who are threatening to pull out of the few existing organizations we have. Because, you know, the UN system was created out of the ashes of the Second World War. And if you destroy it now, I don't know whether it will be easy to recreate in future. That's why it becomes very important that, that we should articulate a view for a more independent, more autonomous, better funded, and therefore more relevant UN. When I ran for Secretary General, I was a strong advocate of UN reform. Not because it had failed, but because it had done well enough to be worth reforming.
So I have another question by Nikhil Totuka, and he asked the same thing that, sir, you've been at the helm of UN at this time of pandemic. What would have been your 3 primary points of action?
In terms of the pandemic?
First
of all, I think the world should have got together to identify the virus much sooner. Whether you blame WHO for doing it or not, I myself not blaming them, because I believe many of the UN agencies were set up in such a way that they have to be responsive to the powerful member states. And we saw this in the UN Security Council, where the US had a lot of disproportionate clout. And so clearly the WHO felt they had to listen to China. I've heard from a very reliable source that WHO did want to send a delegation to Wuhan in the first week of January to see for themselves what the story was. And the Chinese wouldn't give them a visa. And the WHO, like the UN, has no choice. You have to accept the decision of sovereign member states. These international bodies have been set up by sovereign member states, and the sovereignty cannot be challenged. So it's your sovereign right whether to give a visa or not. And I can tell you that, that this is a genuine challenge, because obviously then we could not have easily been able to get independently to the truth that China concealed. It was only in late March, early April, that the Chinese quietly doubled the casualty figures for Wuhan, admitting they had been lying from the preceding 3 months. So these are the kinds of problems we have. So the first thing to do is to create a mechanism where countries can come together and genuinely come up with a common understanding of what the problem is. Secondly, I would have definitely wanted to have internationally agreed protocols. Imagine if all countries had been told no international travel, lockdown, prevent the virus from getting out. You know, it worked in China. In China, the Wuhan virus didn't spread to Beijing. It didn't become a Beijing virus because they locked down Wuhan. They converted Wuhan into a jail practically. And the only cases in China in January and early February were in Wuhan. And people who had come from Wuhan had to be isolated elsewhere. But because they were done, you see, the virus is an opportunistic virus. It needs a host to feed on. So if you already got yourself a host, and that host has fought back and he is now well, you have to go somewhere else, otherwise you die. And the virus can only go somewhere else if there is somebody else who doesn't have the virus, who is a hospitable body for the virus. Now, if there is no hospitable body, because you're not going anywhere, you can't go anywhere, everyone is locked in, then you will die and the virus died out. Now, that kind of thing could have been replicated on a global scale. That would be the second one. And the third one would have been, of course, I think, as an Indian leader, I would have said we need much more planning domestically for what we should do. And I think that if we had done more planning, we could have prevented some of these things. You know, frankly, there's some limitations to so-called social distancing or physical distancing. In our cities, for example, congested urban areas where people are living 6, 7 people to a room, you're not going to really meaningfully have physical distancing through a lockdown. What we could have done was create certain rules. For example, make masks compulsory. No one can step out on the street without a mask. End of story. And if you don't have a mask, you will be either sent back home or arrested or fined or whatever. Really be tough on that. So that, again, the virus can't escape from one person to another. You could have, for example, allowed businesses to function, but with practical distancing where feasible. Factories can create distancing. Offices can create distancing. Certainly, museums, cultural sites, shops can create distancing. Many European countries that did this well, we could have learned from. Sweden, Austria, and so on. The shops didn't close, but they were told by law you can only have 6 people in your shop at any one time, depending on the square footage of the shop. So people had to wait outside in the queue, and the queue is also socially distanced. We can do these things. It's not impossible to do, but it needs time to plan. And there could be some global standards and advice coming from a globally agreed approach. Sadly, none of this happened.
What are the most important tips you would give to young people who have aspirations to be in politics? Asked by Purvika Bhambani Tharoor. She's asked a lot of questions and she seems to be a big fan of yours, but this is the one which I've picked to ask you.
Okay, thanks, Sarin. Yeah, because we're running out of time, but Purvika, thank you for being a fan. And I don't think we've met, but I'm delighted that there's so many questions that you have. As far as young people coming into politics is concerned, there are only 2 or 3 things I'd say. First of all, be sure about your motives, because as far as I'm concerned, there is absolutely no doubt that the only worthwhile politics is a politics of service. If you're coming because you want to see, I don't know, power, or worse still, you want to make money, some people have done, I must say that I must say that you're in the wrong profession. If you want money, go off and become an accountant, or a successful businessman, or even a successful lawyer, but not, I think, politics. Politics, you have to come in a spirit of service. Secondly, for a young person, one of the challenges is that you have to make some sacrifices. So you've just come out of university, for example. When you go into a new career, you can devote all your attention to that. You won't have time for politics. But if politics is your new career, you may not be able to go into the work that you've actually prepared yourself for. And then if, let's say, for whatever reason, after 10 years, you want to quit politics and go back, you may find it difficult to compete with all the bright youngsters who come into that profession later. As you know, my approach was too far the other way. I worked in a profession for too long, perhaps, before coming into politics. So by the time I came in, there were people, quote unquote, senior to me in the party who are much junior to me in years and experience. But their experience at least had been there from the student days in politics, and therefore they were seen as experienced politicians, whereas my experience was in the outside world. And so I was seen as a greenhorn in politics. That's a disadvantage if you come in late. So you have to strike a balance. My own advice would be a 2-stage process. Do some student politics, youth politics, then get into your profession, develop that professional skill, have a talent, have a career, make your family secure, create a family and make it financially secure, and then come back into politics, including with the roots that you built during your youth. That would probably be the best formula, because then you have both options always available to you. I was told an anecdote. But first of all, let me tell you my own experience when I went into politics from coming from outside, and I started getting introduced to all these political leaders in Kerala. I used to always, my first question to them would be, so what is your profession? And they looked at me with shock and said, why politics, of course. And after 2 or 3 times, I stopped asking that question, because every one of them had been there from the Kerala Students' Union days, the Youth Congress, and then nothing else. And then I was told some years later by a friend, I think it was Geeta Reddy, in fact, Rajiv, who told me the story of Rajiv Gandhi, that when somebody gave him the answer, my profession is politics, he said, that is a shame. Everybody should actually do a job to finance your politics. You should have a profession. So I think that Rajiv Gandhi was absolutely right. So I would tell young people, get a taste of politics, of ideas, of service as a young person. Do a profession, get yourself your financial security so you never need to make money out of politics. And then go into politics when you can bring your experience and your ideals to bear. Good luck to you, Poon.
I think very well said, sir.
Dr. Tharoor, आज आपने हिंदी बोलने में कहीं गलती नहीं गई. You got 100%.
लिंक की भी गलती नहीं थी.
आप हिंदी में आराम से स्पीच दे सकते हैं. You are extraordinary. Every time it is a great pleasure listening to you, sir. You will be remembered always and always for this wonderful talk show, Hum Tum Nine. यूँ कहना चाहूँगा कि आज आपने हम सभी के दिलों पर राज कर लिया. आप हमेशा की तरह छा गए. Well, how can someone be so knowledgeable, so great an orator, and at the same time so humble? Well, I thank you on behalf of our chairman Rajiv Arora, co-chairman Jayeshi Pediwal, secretary Ajay Data, our advisor SS Bhandari, our secretary Bhavna Jagwani, and treasurer Anil Bakshi, and all the JCF members and people gathered here from all over the world. Thank you once again, and with this we come to an end of our talk show. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much, Jaju Saab and Rajiv and Tarang for their questions. And let me apologize to all those who sent questions. I gather there were over 80 questions. Obviously, Tarang was only able to give me half a dozen of them, but that was the time available. I am glad that there are questions. Stay interested and stay involved, people. We will have future opportunities. Maybe under the umbrella of AIPC in Jaipur, we can see you all.
Yes.
All the very best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Namaskar.
Thank you.